So what is going on, guys? It's Triple G here, back with another Tiny Tina's Wonderlands video, and we have our first official gameplay footage of the video game. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this down. We're going to freeze frame this video at some key points so you don't miss a thing. But if you want to watch the trailer in its full glory, it will be at the end of this video. So if you want to skip to the end, watch it through in its normal pace, then come back and we will talk about all the content that is in there. And trust me, you are going to want to do that. So let's get straight into it. So as you would expect, Tiny Tina's is a fantasy video game. So we see a ton of castles, catapults, and a few different rainbow and castle scenes, as you would expect. We even get to see a pirate ship, as well as what looks like being fired from the catapults is actually fiery skulls, which would be kind of fitting into the Borderlands franchise already. The first couple of scenes, we start to see the skeletons, of which we've seen screenshots of before, but none of this is the actual gameplay footage just as yet. The first new footage we see Tiny Tina sat around the table with a couple of other players getting ready to play D&D. And then we get our first look at what looks like 4 characters, which kind of looks like you'll be able to play. We have an orc or an ogre looking guy on the left. We have what looks like a cross between a wizard and maybe a warlock from Destiny 2. We have an imperious looking woman in what looks like a leopard print cloak. And finally, what can only be described as a kind of like an elf dude on the right hand side at the end. So very, very exciting here to see whether or not we'll be able to play and look like these characters as we go through. The next thing we see some fast transitions from gameplay footage. So we see a shark crossed with a lizard with a pirate ship in the background. We then get to see what looks like a guy just normally exploding with a barrel next to him. But if you look on the left hand side, there is a projectile object being fired from our character's left hand. It's also worth noting here that this is right at the beginning of the video. However, there is no ADS currently used, and a lot of the time our character's holding the weapon in one hand. This is really, really interesting. The weapons do have scopes, but we didn't see any ADS, so I'll be really surprised if they go away from ADS, given how successful Borderlands was as a shooter. Next, then we have 3 very, very fast scenes. We have a castle scene, which looks like we're carrying some sort of pistol. We then have another scene, which is very heavy sci-fi, but it looks like there is iridium crystals all over the place here. Really, really nice. And again, we are carrying a crossbow. The next scene is really interesting. It links back to one of the screenshots that we've had before. It looks like we have a standard, what look like the old Iridian weapons on Borderlands 2, and the backdrop of the skull and spine just looks really, really good. Looks like we'll be able to get up on those platforms on the right hand side as well. As we freeze the video here, this looks like it could be some sort of boss. We only get this guy for about 0.1 seconds, so it is very intentional here that we don't see much of him, but the way he has entered the arena makes it look like that we have a boss. We then have a very cute but weird like marshmallow crossed with a lizard kind of animal here. Very, very weird indeed, but again, this is a fantasy game, so expect some things like this scattered all the way across the video. Then we have some transitions of scenes which again feature pirate ships. It looks like a potential Moby Dick in there as well. And then we finish off with the wyverns as well, so it's really interesting in there. Then things get really, really interesting. This is where we see our first spell casting done by our character. Again, we're holding a crossbow. There looks like there's something floating on the right hand side there, which looks like a D&D dice. Whether or not we're going to be able to pick those up and they're like special abilities that we're able to use as we're playing is really, really interesting. Not something that anybody has talked about so far, but as you see, we cast our actual spell and then we still obviously have a weapon. Note again, still no ADS at all. Just another note on that ability as well, as you see it transition through, we're actually releasing a rack, very similar to Flack's skill in Borderlands 3. The next thing, we also have an example of another spell. This time a shark looking lizard, for want of a better word, is coming towards us, and we use a spell which actually shrinks them and makes them look a white color. Another example of a spell here, which is vastly different to the first one that we'd seen. Then I just want to pause the image here. This is the most exciting scene that I have seen in the trailer so far. We have what looks like a full-on boss encounter. We have a co-op player in the arena with us as well. As you can see, if you look on the back of this character, they are actually carrying a staff. Now, I'm hoping that this isn't an NPC. The way that this character was moving would suggest that this isn't an NPC. Again, we're firing from no ADS, but as you can see from the way that the character is moving, this arena, everything about this looks really, really cool. Come out of that boss's arena and it looks like then we move into another area which is kind of mountainous. Again, this is a weapon COV. It looks like we have seen this in Borderlands 3 before, and we have two types of enemies here, a big brute enemy and there is a smaller kind of goblin looking enemy on the left hand side here. Next, we see a character that we haven't seen yet in the trailer. His armor absolutely looks fantastic. Looks like it's got dragon wings here. It also has kind of like a Praetorian helmet, carrying a Vladoff AR as well. Interestingly enough, this guy is holding it in two hands rather than the single hand as the rest of the trailer has indicated. Then we have an absolutely fantastic piece of cinematography, and of course it's actually gameplay as well. We see 2 or 3 wyverns come towards us and we use a spell to freeze or cryo these enemies and they fall to the ground. This is a huge moment and a huge gameplay mechanic for what potentially could come in Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. I am excited to see how this works and how much you can freeze it, how often you can do this, because this is something that kind of will work like an action skill, but can be something that I would always use because, you know, immobilizing enemies is just a fantastic gameplay mechanic. Then we go back and we see another character. Now, she is absolutely stunning. She has some leggings on that has cauldrons and bones and all those kind of things that you would expect to see in sci-fi. We only see her for a couple of seconds, and that's okay because then we get to see a new enemy type. Now, this guy looks absolutely badass. In his red armor, he has kind of Loki horns as well. He's also carrying an axe. And a key moment here, huge moment, is we don't use a weapon to kill him. He is what looks like outside melee range, and we hit him with a two-handed spell attack. Now, that's something that hasn't been seen so far. It wasn't even hinted before. In fact, they reinforced guns just before this segment of the trailer. So it's really, really surprising to see that in the trailer. Just one final note, as we freeze frame it here, you will see a legendary pop out from this guy. So don't fear, it is very much still Borderlands. Then we get a lovely, nice cinematic of what looks like a giant soda can with a river of soda running down below. Now, we don't know at this point whether or not that will hurt you, but one interesting thing that I'd like to point out, on the left-hand side on the cliff there, we have a chest, which is great news. Again, sticking with the tradition of chests and loot for a Borderlands game. So really, really nice to see that featured in the trailer. Then we move on to a very strange bit of the trailer. It looks like a kind of a mini game within Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, where we look at what looks like the big head mode from Borderlands 3, but we're also looking over the top. This is really, really interesting. It's again nothing that we've seen from any Borderlands game ever. Really, really interesting. The second scene we see as well, there is a fast travel here on the right hand side. Again, we see this kind of ogre that we've seen in the previous screenshots, ammo chest, and another dice on the left hand side. I am really, really interested whether you don't actually have abilities you spec yourself, but you go around the world and pick up these spells and these abilities for you to use as you're playing. Now, I just want to pause the video just here after what looks like, what I can only presume is a reload sequence. Now, I'm kind of thinking here that we may be seeing a return to Iridian weapons. This is the second time a weapon has featured in the trailer that looks like the old Iridian weapons in Borderlands 2. Again, looks like we're sprinkling some dust in the reload mechanic here, not something that we've seen in Borderlands 3. Looks like we're in a pirate's cove as well in this scene, so very, very interesting. Then it looks like we've got another boss. Now she looks like a cross between a iridium charged wizard with a skeleton as well. It looks like there's some kind of tentacles at the background, and that could be a mouth of an enemy as well. Very, very interesting here. Again, looks like a little bit of a mini boss. One of the really interesting things is in the next part of the video, it looks like chests have a chance to turn into creatures. This screenshot here shows what the chest looks like when that happens. It is quite phenomenally horrible, to be quite honest with you, and I'm sure will scare a number of players as we get through this. If the excitement hasn't got you here, well, just prepare to take a breath. We then see something in this trailer that I cannot believe we are seeing in a Borderlands game. We have a third-person view of an ability, and it looks incredible. It looks like we are spinning like you would have seen in Diablo or in a Cyclone build in any video game. And this guy is spinning around and just knocking enemies by the wayside. Looks really, really interesting indeed. The next scene, again, we are using a crossbow. Note the theme that most of the time in this trailer, we are using a crossbow. And then we are using an ability that lifts up the enemies and just decimates them. Really, really interesting. Again, the spells kind of feel like a mixture of grenades, action skills, and whatever. So it's really, really interesting to see how this is going to play out when the game is actually released. Another quick thing just to grab here is look at the size of the sword on the back of this character. Now it looks like this is a female version of one of the 4 characters that we saw at the start. Is this a playable character? I don't know, but if it is, I want to use that freaking sword as fast as possible. We have no idea what that is on the left hand side. That could be the lid of a chest. I'm not quite sure there, but very, very interesting nonetheless. As we pause the video here, we can see how this fantasy world has really warped in Tiny Tina's mind. We actually see Furior and not Tedior shown on this weapon here. Just goes to show you what Tiny Tina sees through her own lens. As well as that, we also see a new enemy carrying a staff on the right hand side as well. It's worth noting here that this is one of the enemy types that we saw earlier on and which we weren't sure was an NPC. But as you can see from the footage, we go straight from holding the Tedior or Furior weapon in this case and then just slam the ground. So it does look like we are actually going to play that. One of my personal favorite moments is this screenshot right here. We have on the right hand side a standard person using a sniper rifle with a huge sword on the back, and then in my opinion my most favorite part of this trailer, and that is this guy with his freaking bow. Please let me use a bow in Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, because if I can, I am never ever gonna stop using them. I absolutely love bows, and this guy looks absolutely incredible. On the subject of bows as well, we did get this screenshot which did appear to have a character using a bow. Interestingly enough, the bow was in his left hand, so whether or not the bow is a spell as an additional weapon is really, really interesting. Note how the bow actually has multiple projectiles on it as this shark is looking to attack you. It is really, really interesting to see whether or not we're going to use a bow. Again, please let me use a bow. Please let me use a bow. Of course, then the trailer moves on to loot. One of the things that you should really know about these loot scenes is, yes, we have Mr. Talk, but if we go back a second and start to pause the video as the loot is dropping, you will see that there is a sword on the left hand side, a sword in the middle as well. We have a health file, what looks like some cash in little bags and whatever. And then the second scene that we see with even more loot, after we see the glorious Mr. Talk, we see a ton of weapons. So we see what looks like a Krieg melee weapon. We definitely have swords. We definitely have long swords as well. It looks like there is a shotgun on the right hand side. We have SMGs on the left. It is going to be an incredible time here. There isn't enough words I can say about this. Everything that you can think of in a video game is now in Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. It's absolutely incredible. Then we get a lovely cameo from Butt Stallion, and then what looks like 2 bosses. Now the first one is this wyvern / dragon guy. Now he is not been featured in any of the publishing so far. Really, really interested to see if this is a main boss or this is just another mini boss. And then we get to see a really tall looking skeleton dude, which we are looking like we're firing a Talk rocket launcher at them. This guy is huge in comparison to us. Really interesting to see what this fight entails. After a brief little section of more combat, we see something that is incredibly cool. We see our character throw an axe with their left hand and recall it like Thor. This is incredible, absolutely incredible. And then for a brief second, we get to see another boss. Now this guy looks like he's had his heart completely ripped out. He has a kind of Bane-like mask on him as well. Again, it looks like these bosses are all going to be huge, are all going to be really nice, tough tasks, which is what we want to see in our video game. Finally, we transition back to Tiny Tina, who is now rolling. Of course, it says Buckets of Badasses on her book, which is obviously a reference to the Borderlands 2 DLC. There is nothing of note that I have noticed in the background, but I am going to keep looking there. We do have a Typhon de Leon poster. That is the only notable reference in the background there of what I can see. Finally, we obviously get it confirmed that it is March 25th that Tiny Tina's Wonderlands is going to be released. I am ecstatic about this video game so far. They have done an exceptional job on this trailer. There is a ton of things in here. Expect more and more things to come out over the next couple of days. I've had an hour to look at this, and I've already been recording for 30 minutes of that hour, just trying to understand what is in. As I said before, I'm now going to play the trailer completely so you can watch it uninterrupted. If you have enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel, as we're going to be covering all the Tiny Tina Wonderlands footage all the way up until release. And otherwise, I'll catch you on the flip, guys.